The morning sun peeked through the blinds of the corner office with a view of the city skyline. A man in his mid-40s adjusted his blue silk tie, checking his reflection in the glass wall of his office. His dark skin contrasted with his crisp, white shirt as he straightened the gold cufflinks, a gift from his late father when he got his first big job. These small morning rituals always grounded him before a busy day. "Mr. Taylor?" His assistant popped her head in. "Your car is waiting downstairs. All your documents for the San Francisco conference are uploaded to your tablet, and I've checked. You in for your flight?" "Thank you, Diane. You're always 3 steps ahead of me," he said with a warm smile that reached his eyes. As the CEO of Horizon Innovations, one of the country's leading tech companies, Ray Taylor had built something extraordinary from the ground up. Starting in his garage 20 years ago, he now employed over 5,000 people and was responsible for breakthrough technologies that changed how the world communicated. The Wall Street Journal had recently featured him in their Most Influential Business Leaders issue, calling him the quiet force reshaping Silicon Valley. Down in the lobby, he nodded to the security guard who held the door for him. "Big day, Mr. Taylor?" "Just another conference, Miguel. Though this one could finally get our new healthcare initiative the backing it needs." The drive to JFK Airport was filled with last-minute calls and emails. Ray had worked for months on the presentation he would deliver tomorrow, a revolutionary platform that would make healthcare more accessible to underserved communities. It wasn't just business for him, it was personal. He had grown up watching. His mother worked 3 jobs to pay medical bills after his father got sick. At the airport, Ray moved efficiently through security, accustomed to the routine. He noticed a few double takes from people who recognized him from business magazines or television appearances, but most travelers were too busy with their own journeys to pay attention. The first-class lounge was quiet, filled with business people, tapping on laptops or speaking in hushed tones on phones. Ray nodded to a few familiar faces from the industry, before settling into a comfortable chair to review his presentation one last time. When boarding was announced, he gathered his things and headed to the gate. The attendant scanning boarding passes smiled broadly at him. "Good morning, Mr. Taylor. It's an honor to have you flying with us today." "The honor is mine. Thank you for getting us all safely to our destinations," he replied. He always made a point to acknowledge the people who made his busy life possible. As he walked down the jet bridge, Ray mentally switched gears from CEO mode to the brief period of downtime the flight would offer. 6 hours of uninterrupted thinking. Space was a luxury these days. The cabin of the plane was cool and smelled of fresh coffee. A flight attendant with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun stood at the entrance to first class, greeting passengers with practiced smiles. Ray noticed how her eyes lingered on each boarding pass, matching faces to names with professional efficiency. "Good morning," Ray said as he approached, boarding pass extended. Something shifted in the flight attendant's expression, so subtle most wouldn't catch it. The smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. She glanced at his boarding pass, then back at him, her gaze lingering just a moment too long on his face. "First class is to the left," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been, with the passengers ahead of him. "Yes, I know. Thank you," Ray replied evenly, used to these small moments that punctuated his days. He found his seat, 2A, a window spot he'd reserved specifically for the view of the clouds that always made him feel like a kid again. Placing his leather briefcase under the seat in front of him, he settled in, unbuttoning his suit jacket. Around him, other first-class passengers were being greeted warmly. The same blonde flight attendant who had checked his boarding pass was now moving through the cabin, offering pre-flight drinks with animated charm. "Can I get you champagne, sir?" she asked the older white gentleman across the aisle, her voice musical. "Sparkling water for you, ma'am," she offered to a woman 2 rows ahead. When she passed Ray's seat, her eyes slid over him as if he were part of the furniture. He waited patiently, watching as she attended to every other passenger in the first-class cabin. Finally, as she turned to head back to the galley, "Excuse me," Ray called out politely. "Could I get a water, please?" The flight attendant turned, her smile back in place but not quite reaching her eyes. "Of course," she said, with a tone that suggested she was doing him a favor. As she walked away, Ray noticed another flight attendant, younger, with kind eyes, watching the interaction with a slight frown. Minutes later, the blonde flight attendant returned with a plastic cup of water, not the glass tumblers she'd given to other first-class passengers. She placed it on his armrest without a word. "Thank you," Ray said, meeting her eyes directly. She paused then, looking at him more carefully. "Is this your first time in first class?" she asked, her voice just low enough that nearby passengers might not hear. 20 years of boardroom negotiations had taught Ray to keep his expression neutral when surprised. "No," he replied simply. "I fly this route about twice a month." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "It's just that you're sitting in seat 2A, and I wanted to make sure you found the right seat." Ray glanced at his boarding pass still in his hand, then back at her. "This is the correct seat. Thank you for your concern." She hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then gave a tight nod and moved on. As she walked away, Ray caught the name on her badge. Patricia. He made a mental note, not out of spite, but from years of business training that taught him to remember details. The younger flight attendant caught his eye as she passed, giving him an apologetic smile. Ray returned it with a small nod. He'd experienced much worse than this in his life and career. These moments no longer surprised him, though they never stopped being disappointing. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Ray opened his laptop to review his presentation slides one last time. The healthcare initiative was personal to him, a way to give back to communities like the one he grew up in. He had poured months of work into this project, determined to make quality healthcare accessible to those who needed it most. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin filled with the aroma of warming food. Ray's stomach grumbled, reminding him he'd skipped breakfast in his rush to make the early flight. He closed his laptop and tucked it into his briefcase, watching as Patricia and the younger flight attendant rolled the meal cart down the aisle. Patricia served each first-class passenger with professional charm, her voice taking on that sing-song quality flight attendants often used. "Would you prefer the grilled chicken or the pasta today?" she asked the businessman across the aisle. "The chicken smells wonderful," the man replied, and Patricia beamed as she arranged his tray, complete with a fresh roll, butter, and a small side salad with bright cherry tomatoes. "And for your dessert, we have a chocolate mousse or fresh fruit." The scene repeated itself with each passenger. Friendly banter, careful arrangement of food, tiny details attended to with precision. Ray watched, his face a practiced mask of patience. In boardrooms across the country, he had perfected the art of waiting his turn, of not showing when something bothered him. When Patricia finally reached his row, her demeanor shifted subtly. The smile remained fixed in place, but it was more like a photograph of a smile than the real thing. "Chicken or pasta?" she asked flatly, not making eye contact. "What would you recommend?" Ray asked pleasantly, trying to engage her as she had engaged the others. Patricia's eyes flicked to his briefly. "The pasta is fine," she said, already reaching for it before he could respond. She placed the tray down with considerably less care than she had shown the other passengers. The napkin was missing, and unlike the other trays, there was no salt and pepper. She turned away immediately. "Excuse me," Ray said. "Could I get some water as well, please?" "I'll be back with drinks," she replied over her shoulder, already moving to the next passenger. Ray looked down at his tray and paused. Something wasn't right. The pasta appeared different from what he'd seen served to others. The sauce was separated, with an oily film on top. He lifted the foil covering his roll and found spots of green and white mold speckling the surface. He sat very still for a moment, taking it in. 20 years as a black man in the corporate world had taught him to choose his battles carefully. Was this just an unfortunate mistake or something else? He glanced around at nearby passengers' trays. Their food looked fresh. Steaming pasta with vibrant sauce, golden brown rolls that appeared to have been baked that morning. When Patricia returned with the drink cart, Ray stopped her again. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with my meal," he said quietly, not wanting to cause a scene. He lifted the bread roll slightly, revealing the mold. And the pasta doesn't look quite right. Patricia barely glanced at the tray. That's just how the bread looks. It's an artisanal roll with herbs, she said dismissively. I don't think green spots on bread are herbs, Ray replied, keeping his voice even. And the pasta sauce shouldn't be separated like this. Patricia's expression hardened. If you're going to be picky about airplane food, perhaps you should bring your own next time. Her voice was just low enough that passengers across the aisle couldn't quite hear, but the woman sitting beside Ray looked up from her magazine, eyebrows raised. I'm not being picky, Ray said. The food appears to be spoiled. It's perfectly fine, Patricia insisted, her voice taking on an edge. Our other passengers seem to be enjoying their meals without complaint. The woman next to Ray leaned forward, slightly looking at his tray. Her eyes widened. Oh my, she said. That bread definitely has mold on it. Patricia's face flushed. I'll see what I can do, she said curtly, snatching the tray away with such force that a bit of the separated pasta sauce sloshed onto Ray's sleeve. As she walked away, Ray calmly took out his handkerchief and wiped the sauce from his cuff. The woman next to him, a gray-haired professor type with kind eyes, looked embarrassed. I couldn't help noticing. That wasn't right, she said softly. Your meal was nothing like mine. She gestured to her tray where the pasta looked fresh and appetizing, the roll perfectly golden. Thank you for speaking up, Ray said with a genuine smile. I'm Dr. Chen, she offered. I teach at Berkeley. I'm guessing from your presentation, slides that you're heading to the Tech for Humanity conference. Ray Taylor, he said, offering his hand. And yes, I'm giving the keynote tomorrow. Dr. Chen's eyes lit with recognition. Horizon Innovations. I've been following your healthcare initiative. My department is actually researching similar accessibility issues. Their conversation was interrupted as the younger flight attendant approached with a new tray. His name badge read David. I apologize for the mix-up, Mr. Taylor, David said, setting down a fresh meal that looked identical to what the other passengers had received. I'm not sure how that happened. His eyes darted nervously toward the front of the cabin where Patricia was aggressively folding napkins. Ray thanked him, noticing how David seemed genuinely distressed by the situation. As David turned to leave, the flight attendant hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. Sir, would you mind if I spoke with you briefly when you're finished with your meal? He asked in a near whisper. Something in the young man's expression, a mixture of discomfort and determination, caught Ray's attention. He nodded subtly and David moved on to help other passengers. Ray turned back to his meal, now deep in thought. As a CEO, he had developed an instinct for when something wasn't just an isolated incident, but a symptom of a larger problem. The moldy food, Patricia's attitude, David's apparent concern, it all added up to something that needed addressing. Beside him, Dr. Chen discreetly took out her phone and showed him a photo she had taken of both their meal trays side by side before his had been replaced. The difference was striking and unmistakable. Just in case you need it, she said quietly. I've seen this kind of thing too many times to stay silent anymore. Ray nodded his thanks, sending the photo to his own phone. He wasn't sure yet what he would do with this information, but his father had always taught him to document everything. In a world that tries to make you doubt yourself, his dad used to say, evidence is your best friend. As Ray ate his replacement meal, he noticed Patricia watching him from the galley, her expression unreadable. He maintained his composure, finishing his food while chatting with Dr. Chen about the conference. But inside, his mind was already working through scenarios, weighing options, considering the best way to address what had happened. This wasn't just about a bad meal on a plane. This was about dignity, respect, and making sure this didn't happen to someone else the next time. After finishing his meal, Ray excused himself and made his way to the restroom at the back of the first-class cabin. As he passed the galley, David, the younger flight attendant, was arranging coffee cups on a tray. Their eyes met briefly and David gave a small nod. On his way back to his seat, Ray paused near the galley, pretending to stretch his legs after sitting for so long. David approached with a professional smile. Can I get you anything, sir? he asked in a normal tone, but his eyes conveyed something more. Just stretching a bit, Ray replied. Long flight. David lowered his voice. Sir, if you have a moment, I'd like to speak with you privately. He glanced toward the back of the plane. Patricia's on her break in the crew rest area. We have about 10 minutes. Ray nodded, following David's lead to a small semi-private area near the emergency exit where flight attendants sometimes stood during slow periods of the flight. I want to apologize about your meal, David began, his hands fidgeting with his uniform cuff. But it wasn't a mistake or an accident. He took a deep breath. I saw Patricia deliberately switch your meal tray. Ray's expression remained calm, though his attention sharpened. You saw her do this? David nodded, his voice dropping even lower. We prepared the meal carts together. All the trays were the same. But when we started service, I saw her go to the back galley and take out an old tray, one from yesterday's flight that should have been discarded. Ray's mind was working quickly, processing this information. And you're certain this was intentional? Yes, David said firmly. I've been flying with Patricia for 8 months and... He hesitated, looking down before meeting Ray's eyes again. This isn't the first time. She does this regularly to certain passengers. Certain passengers, Ray repeated, knowing exactly what that meant. People of color, especially well-dressed black men, David confirmed. She's subtle about it, makes comments in the galley about people who don't belong in first class. Most of the crew ignores it or laughs it off, but it's gotten worse recently. Ray studied the young man's face. Why are you telling me this, David? It could cause problems for you. David straightened his shoulders slightly. My grandmother raised me better than to stay silent. She always said that watching wrong being done and saying nothing is the same as doing it yourself. He paused. Also, I recognized you. My sister works in tech and has a poster of you on her wall. From that speech you gave last year about creating pathways for kids from underfunded schools. Ray nodded, remembering the speech. He'd launched a scholarship program that day. I've wanted to report Patricia's behavior before, David continued, but it's complicated. She's been with the airline for 20 years. She's friends with management. Previous reports about her have mysteriously disappeared. I understand complicated workplace dynamics, Ray said. Thank you for taking this risk. There's something else, David added. I overheard you talking with Dr. Chen about your healthcare initiative. The airline you're flying today, Skyway Airlines, it's actually owned by Meridian Corporation. The name caught Ray's attention immediately. Meridian was one of the largest corporate conglomerates in the country, with holdings in transportation, healthcare, and technology. More importantly, Horizon Innovations, Ray's company, was currently in negotiations with Meridian for a major corporate travel contract that would handle all business flights for his 5,000 employees. Are you certain about that? Ray asked, his mind already putting pieces together. Yes, sir. Skyway became a subsidiary of Meridian about 2 years ago. It's not widely advertised, but all our paychecks come from Meridian now. Ray's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked it quickly. A message from his assistant confirming his dinner with Meridian's CEO tomorrow night after the conference keynote. There's one more thing, David said, pulling out his phone. I've been documenting Patricia's behavior for the past 3 months. He showed Ray a folder of dated notes, times, flight numbers, and brief descriptions of incidents. I wasn't sure what to do with this information, but maybe it can help. Ray looked at the young man with newfound respect. You've been very thorough. I believe in doing things right, David said simply. Would you be willing to share this documentation with me? Ray asked. David nodded without hesitation, sending the files to the email address Ray provided. Thank you, Ray said. I may have some questions later, if that's all right. Of course. I'm working the return flight to New York tomorrow night as well if you need to reach me. As they prepared to end their conversation, David hesitated. Sir, what do you plan to do? Patricia has gotten away with this behavior for years. Ray considered the question carefully. I believe in addressing problems at their root, not just treating symptoms, he said finally. Let me think about the best approach. David nodded, turning to go back to his duties. One last question, Ray said. The airline's policy handbook. Is it available on the plane? Yes, there's one in each galley, required by regulation. Could I take a quick look at it? David looked surprised but retrieved the thick binder from a compartment. Ray flipped through it efficiently until he found what he was looking for, the section on employee conduct and discrimination policies. He took several photos with his phone, paying particular attention to the procedures for reporting and disciplinary actions. One paragraph stood out. Any Meridian Corporation executive or board member witnessing discriminatory behavior has the authority to initiate immediate administrative action, including suspension of duties pending investigation. Ray thanked David and returned to his seat, his mind working through various scenarios. He opened his laptop and connected to the plane's Wi-Fi, sending a brief, encrypted message to his chief of staff. Need everything we have on Meridian Corporation. Structure, particularly their diversity initiatives and executive board. Also our current contract status with them. Urgent. While waiting for a response, he searched his own email archives for a particular invitation he'd received last month, but hadn't paid much attention to at the time. There it was. An invitation to join Meridian's Corporate Diversity Advisory Board. He'd been too busy to respond, but the invitation indicated the position came with certain oversight responsibilities. His chief of staff's response came through quickly. Sending full Meridian file now. Contract negotiations in final stage. Your signature needed next week. Note: you were recently approved for their Diversity Advisory Board. You asked me to accept while you were in Tokyo last month. Technically, you're already part of their oversight structure. Need more details about why you're asking? Ray smiled slightly. I'll explain later, he wrote back. Please send me the official appointment letter and any documentation about the scope of that advisory role. As the new files appeared in his inbox, Ray settled back in his seat, reviewing everything carefully. Beside him, Dr. Chen had fallen, asleep reading academic papers, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. Ray glanced toward the front of the cabin where Patricia had returned from her break and was now serving drinks, her professional smile firmly in place for most of the passengers. When she caught him looking, her expression cooled instantly. Ray turned back to his screen, a plan forming in his mind. This was no longer just about a spoiled meal or one flight attendant's bias. This was about systems that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked, about accountability at every level. And as it happened, he was now in a unique position to address it directly. His father's voice echoed in his memory. When you find yourself at the table where decisions are made, remember, all those who never got an invitation, speak for them too. Ray began making notes, preparing for landing. For the next hour, Ray worked quietly on his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his focused expression. The pieces were coming together. Through secure messages with his legal team and executive assistant, he had confirmed several key facts that would shape his next steps. The plane began its initial descent into San Francisco, the captain's voice announcing they would be landing in approximately 40 minutes. Ray saved his work and closed his laptop, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. He wasn't typically someone who sought confrontation, but he believed deeply in accountability. His company's core values, printed on every employee badge, included dignity for all as the first principle. Beside him, Dr. Chen stirred from her. Aproni, did I miss anything exciting? She asked with a smile, adjusting her glasses. Just putting some thoughts together, Ray replied. Dr. Chen, may I ask you something? As someone who's been in academia for a while, how do you handle situations where institutional problems become personal? She considered his question thoughtfully. In my 30 years at Berkeley, I've learned that institutional problems are always personal to someone. They just aren't personal to the people with the power to change them. She glanced toward the front of the cabin. Is this about what happened earlier? Ray nodded. I've discovered some interesting connections between this airline and my company. Dr. Chen listened as Ray explained the relationship between Skyway Airlines and Meridian Corporation, and his unexpected position on their diversity board. So you actually have authority in this situation, she observed. That's quite a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidences, Ray said, "but I do believe in being prepared when opportunity presents itself." He showed her the section of the airline policy manual he'd photographed. "According to this, I have the authority to take immediate action regarding discriminatory behavior. The question is, what action best addresses the actual problem?" Dr. Chen thought for a moment. "In my experience, the most effective approach combines immediate consequences with systemic change. One without the other rarely works." Ray nodded, typing a note on his phone. "That's exactly what I was thinking." "What can I do to help?" she asked. "Would you be willing to provide a witness statement about what you observed? I've created a secure link where you can upload your account and the photos you took." "Absolutely," she agreed without hesitation. As they continued chatting, Ray noticed other passengers in first class occasionally glancing his way. Word of the meal incident had apparently spread through the cabin. A businessman across the aisle caught his eye and gave a subtle nod of support. Ray's phone vibrated with an incoming message. His assistant had sent over the full organizational chart for Meridian Corporation, highlighting the chain of command for Skyway Airlines. There was also a complete dossier on the upcoming contract negotiations, including the team members who would be present at tomorrow's meeting. Another message contained the official confirmation of his appointment to Meridian's Corporate Diversity Advisory Board, including the scope of his authority. Board members are empowered to ensure Meridian's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination is upheld across all subsidiaries. Ray sent a quick message to his legal counsel. "Please prepare a brief on executive authority within diversity initiatives, specifically regarding immediate administrative actions. Need it before landing." While waiting for a response, he drafted a clear, concise summary of the events that had transpired on the flight, including times, direct quotes, and references to the evidence he had collected. His father had always told him that in difficult situations, stick to the facts and focus on solutions, not just problems. The response from his legal counsel arrived promptly. "As a board member of their diversity initiative, you have authority, under Section 4.3 of Meridian's corporate bylaws, to implement emergency administrative actions if you directly witness discriminatory behavior. This includes temporary suspension of duties pending formal investigation. Your appointment letter specifically references this authority." Ray reviewed all the information again, organizing it methodically. He was not someone who acted impulsively, especially in situations like this. Every decision needed to be reasoned, defensible, and constructive. He thought about David, the young flight attendant who had taken a risk by speaking up. And he thought about how many other passengers might have experienced similar treatment who didn't have the platform or position to address it. The captain announced their final approach to San Francisco. Flight attendants began preparing the cabin for landing, checking that seats were upright and tray tables stowed. Patricia moved efficiently through the first-class cabin, her manner professionally detached. When she reached Ray's row, she barely made eye contact. "Seat upright, please," she said flatly, already moving to the next passenger. Ray complied, noticing how different her tone was from the warm, almost personal approach she took with other passengers. "Mr. Johnson, could you please bring your seat forward? Thank you so much." As the plane began its final descent, Ray felt a strange calm. Throughout his career, he had faced moments where he could choose to let things slide or take a stand. Early on, he had sometimes chosen the easier path, telling himself that his personal success would eventually create change, but experience had taught him that systems didn't change by themselves, and silence only preserved the status quo. His phone buzzed one last time before he had to switch it to airplane mode again. It was a message from his mother. "Good luck with your keynote tomorrow, son. Remember what your dad always said. Be the change you wish to see, but make sure that change has teeth." Ray smiled at the message. His father had been gone for 15 years, but his wisdom remained a guiding force. A former civil rights attorney, the elder Mr. Taylor had taught his son that true justice required both compassion and firmness. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway, and passengers erupted into the traditional smattering of applause. As they taxied to the gate, Ray gathered his materials and prepared for what would come next. "Whatever you're planning," Dr. Chen said beside him, slipping him her business card. "I'd love to hear how it turns out." "I'll keep you posted," Ray promised, tucking the card into his wallet. The seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began the familiar ritual of standing and retrieving bags from overhead compartments. Ray remained seated watching as Patricia and David moved to their positions near the exits. He took a deep breath and reviewed his plan one last time. This wasn't about personal retribution or making a scene. This was about addressing a pattern of behavior that affected many people and using his position to create meaningful change. The moment had arrived. Ray stood up, straightened his tie, and made his way toward the front of the plane. As the passengers began filing out of the plane, Ray approached the cockpit door where the captain and co-pilot were saying goodbye to departing travelers. He waited patiently for a break in the line. "Excuse me, Captain," Ray said, extending his hand. "I'm Ray Taylor, CEO of Horizon Innovations." The captain, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in the sky, shook his hand firmly. "Captain Wilson, nice to have you aboard, Mr. Taylor. I need a few minutes of your time before I deplane," Ray said, his tone polite but firm. "It concerns an incident that occurred during the flight." Captain Wilson nodded, gesturing toward the cockpit. "Step inside for a moment." Ray turned to David, who was standing nearby. "Would you join us, please? And if possible, I'd like Patricia to be present as well." David's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and went to fetch Patricia, who was helping an elderly passenger with a bag. Inside the small cockpit, Ray briefly explained what had happened with his meal and the subsequent conversation with David. He spoke factually, without accusation or emotion. "These are serious allegations," Captain Wilson said, frowning. "They are," Ray agreed, "and I have documentation to support them." The cockpit door opened again as David entered with Patricia behind him. She looked between the captain and Ray, her professional smile firmly in place, though her eyes showed confusion. "Patricia, this gentleman has raised concerns about an incident during meal service," Captain Wilson began. "Mr. Taylor was served food that was moldy and spoiled," David said quietly. "I saw you take an old tray from yesterday's flight and give it to him specifically." Patricia's face flushed. "That's ridiculous. There must have been a mix-up in catering." "Have photos of the food," Ray said, showing his phone. "And Dr. Chen in seat 2B has photos comparing her meal to what I was initially served." Patricia's smile faltered. "Sometimes meals look different. It's just airplane food. I also have your documented history of similar incidents," Ray continued calmly. "David has been keeping records of your behavior toward passengers of color for months." The color drained from Patricia's face. That's not true. David is new and doesn't understand how things work." Captain Wilson looked troubled. "Patricia, these are very serious accusations." "May I?" Ray asked, pulling out his phone. When the captain nodded, Ray continued. "I should introduce myself more completely. I'm Ray Taylor, CEO of Horizon Innovations, but I'm also a recently appointed member of the Corporate Diversity Advisory Board for Meridian Corporation, your parent company." He showed them the official appointment letter on his phone. According to Section 4.3 of Meridian's corporate bylaws and Skyway's own policy manual, board members who directly witness discriminatory behavior have the authority to implement immediate administrative action. Patricia's professional demeanor cracked. "You can't do anything, you're just a passenger." "Actually, he can," Captain Wilson said, having read the documentation Ray provided. "Meridian restructured our reporting lines last year. The diversity board has direct oversight authority." "This is absurd," Patricia protested, her voice rising. "It was just a mix-up with the food." "It wasn't just the food," David said. "It's been going on for months. The comments you make in the galley about certain passengers, the different service you provide based on how people look." His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "You're making this up," Patricia said, turning to the captain. "Are you really going to take his word over mine? I've been flying with this airline for 20 years. "I have witness statements from multiple passengers," Ray said, "and Dr. Chen is a department chair at Berkeley, who's willing to testify about what she saw. But more importantly, I have David's documented record of similar incidents on previous flights. Captain Wilson rubbed his forehead. What exactly are you requesting, Mr. Taylor? Ray took a deep breath. Based on the authority granted to me as a diversity board member, I am requesting the immediate administrative suspension of Patricia pending a full investigation by Meridian's HR department. This is outrageous, Patricia snapped. You can't just waltz in here and— I'm not doing this lightly, Ray interrupted gently. This appears to be a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked for too long. The evidence I've collected will be submitted to the proper channels, and you'll have every opportunity to present your side during the investigation. The captain looked between them, then nodded slowly. According to company policy, I have to comply with this request. He turned to Patricia. I'm sorry, Patricia, but you'll need to gather your things. You won't be working the return flight while this is being investigated. Patricia's face contorted with anger and humiliation. This is ridiculous. I've given this airline 20 years of my life. And in those 20 years, how many passengers have experienced what I experienced today? Ray asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Patricia had no answer. I'll need your company ID, Captain Wilson said, holding out his hand. This is standard procedure for administrative suspension. With shaking hands, Patricia unpinned her ID badge and slammed it into the captain's palm before storming out of the cockpit. The captain sighed heavily. I'll need to file a report about this and call for a replacement crew member for the return flight. I understand, Ray said. I appreciate your professionalism. He turned to David. Thank you for your courage today. David straightened his shoulders. It was the right thing to do. As they exited the cockpit, the remaining passengers had deplaned, leaving the cabin empty except for the cleaning crew waiting to board. Patricia was gathering her belongings from a crew area, deliberately avoiding eye contact with anyone. Mr. Taylor, Captain Wilson said, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. This isn't what our airline stands for. I believe you, Ray replied, and that's why I think this needs to be addressed properly. It's not about one meal or one flight attendant. It's about making sure everyone is treated with dignity. The captain nodded. We'll cooperate fully with the investigation. As Ray finally deplaned, walking up the jet bridge toward the terminal, he felt a mix of emotions. He hadn't come looking for this situation, but when faced with it, he couldn't simply look away. Too many people did that every day. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant. Car waiting at arrivals. Conference organizers called. They're expecting you at the hotel for pre-keynote meeting in 90 minutes. Life moved on. In a few hours, he would be standing in front of thousands of tech industry leaders, talking about how technology could make healthcare more accessible to underserved communities. The irony wasn't lost on him, working to fix big problems while still encountering the everyday ones. 2 weeks later, Ray received a formal letter from Meridian Corporation. The investigation had been completed, resulting in Patricia's termination. But more importantly, the letter outlined a new comprehensive training program being implemented across all Skyway flights, with David being promoted to lead the initiative. The final paragraph caught Ray's attention. As a result of your actions, we've discovered similar incidents across multiple subsidiaries. The board has approved a complete overhaul of our reporting structures and accountability measures. We would be honored if you would consider taking a more active role in guiding these changes. Ray smiled as he set down the letter. One small, stand on one flight had rippled outward, creating the possibility for genuine change. He thought about all the people who would never know what happened that day, but who might have different experiences in the future because he chose not to stay silent. His father would have been proud. Ray picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Chen's number. She had asked to hear how things turned out, and he had a feeling she'd appreciate the epilogue to their shared flight experience. Sometimes the right person was in the right place at the right time, and sometimes that was enough to start changing the world one flight at a time.